Good evening. Ask anyone you know if they think that the nation's leaders are a group of straight-laced professionals, and you'll get a collective roll of the eyes. The reason is that scandals never seem to stop pouring out of the nation's capital. Politics and underhandedness appear to be inseparable. History is rich with stories of politicians arriving here only to fall prey to one weakness of human nature or the other. Not to mention the tabloid press, which feeds the public's appetite for news from the gutter. As Mark Twain put it, America houses the only distinctive Native American criminal class. In the spirit of that old curmudgeon, I'll take you through 200-odd years of Erebus, lust, and plain idiocy. Framers of our Constitution were wise when they labored to build a government that would keep any individual from acquiring too much power. As you'll now be reminded, power is often too great a burden for human frailties to bear. With that, let's hit the streets. Just after 1 a.m. on June 17, 1972, a security guard found on the 6th floor of the Watergate Hotel, a taped-over door lock on a room to the Democratic Party's headquarters. Suspecting foul play, he called the police, who arrived on the scene to find 5 very well-dressed men, huddled under the furniture, all wearing rubber gloves, and having in their possession high-tech spy gear and 32 sequentially marked $100 bills. Welcome to 2600 Virginia Avenue, where the Watergate scandal began. Perhaps the darkest shadow ever cast over the federal government. By the time the details of the dirty tricks perpetrated by the Committee to Re-elect the President, otherwise known as CREEP, emerged, 25 members of President Richard Nixon's staff had received jail terms at the hands of Maximum John Circa. Nixon himself, facing sure impeachment for reasons of perjury, obstruction of justice, misuse of federal funds, and politicalization of federal agencies, resigned on August 9, 1974, in an outraged, throw the bums out attitude had settled over the nation. The strength of our democracy is in the public consensus and the constitutional safeguards that protect the integrity of that consensus. In the early 1970s, Richard Nixon's administration was willing to bypass any number of those safeguards in the name of gaining 4 more years. As columnist William White wrote,
"We know that politics is extremely rough, but most people in it do, at some point, recognize a line. Admittedly indefinable, but a line beyond which you just don't go."
G. Gordon Liddy was general counsel to CREEP, the Committee to Re-elect the President, at a time when the Nixon campaign was muscling major corporations for illegal contributions, and when the unfortunates on Nixon's infamous enemies list, ostensible political opponents who ranged from George McGovern to David Brinkley to Tony Randall, were treated as threats to national security, subjugated to wiretapping, burglaries, and tax audits. Liddy was only slightly atypical in his belief that the American fatherland, as he called it, was smothering and permissive flab. In his eyes, all was fair in the war of the soul of the country. He was fond of proving his discipline by holding his hand over an open flame. And when CREEP director Jeb Magruder muttered something about getting rid of some enemy, in Liddy's presence, the good soldier grimly announced to a subordinate, "I've been ordered to kill." He was persuaded that wasn't what Magruder had in mind. Liddy's first proposal to Presidential Counsel John Dean and Attorney General John Mitchell for doing in the Democrats was a wild $1 million plan that involved kidnapping radical leaders as well as launching a floating whorehouse off Miami Beach in hopes of luring prominent Democrats into compromising positions. When Mitchell told him to come back with something more realistic, the plan to break into and bug the Democratic National Committee's office in the Watergate Hotel was born. After 2 botched attempts and 1 successful entry on May 27, 1972, Mitchell ordered Liddy to go back for better information. Liddy's team broke in again on June 17th, and the rest is history. A portrait of the burglary, Creep's other activities, and the remarkable G. Gordon Liddy began to emerge during the Watergate Congressional hearings. John Dean testified that an aggrieved Liddy told him after the disastrous break-in that he would never talk, and if anyone wished to shoot him on the street, he was ready. An incredulous public was astounded that Liddy's harebrained schemes even reached the president's ears. That this was indeed the case only became fully apparent when Nixon was finally prevailed upon on August 1974 to release the taped White House conversations between himself and his Chief of Staff, Bob Haldeman, from June 23, 1972. As George F. Will put it, the tapes were more of a smoking howitzer than a smoking gun. Here's a portion of that tape.
Well, who's the ass that did? Is it Liddy? Is that the fellow? He must be a little nuts.
He is.
I mean, he just isn't well screwed on, is he? Is that the problem?
No, but he was under pressure, apparently, to get more information as he got more pressure. He pushed the people harder to move harder.
Pressure from Mitchell?
Apparently.
No, all right, fine. I understand it all. We won't second-guess Mitchell and the rest of them.
Nixon then went on to agree with Haldeman on a cover-up scheme to tell the FBI to lay off its investigations of the break-in because any further breaks in the investigation would be very unfortunate for the country. As the contents of the tapes broke, it was clear that the president himself was complicit in all the dirty tricks perpetrated by his staff, complicit in the myriad of ways his administration stepped over, one might say obliterated, that indefinable line. He resigned from office 4 days later. Over here is the Howard Johnson's where G. Gordon Liddy, former FBI agent and leader of Creep, hung out to do his share of the dirty work. He was paid $235,000 for his job alone. Not bad. Standing in front of the Kennedy Center right now. We now know of JFK, he of the high-minded political idealism and the inspirational vision of the presidency as the new Camelot. It was less than pure both in his political aspirations and his personal life. His administration engaged in more than the usual amount of skullduggery, from the infamous Bay of Pigs invasion to the enlistment of the Chicago's mob help during the 1960 elections to secret assassination plots. Operation Mongoose, the most notorious of the latter, targeted Cuba's Fidel Castro. Various plans, in which the Mafia may have also played a role, to take out the Cuban leader, turned on improbable devices such as poison pens, LSD-laced cigars, and exploding seashells. And then there were the women. Jack Kennedy, like most of the men in his family, was a compulsive philanderer. He and his wife Jackie may have looked the perfect couple, but their marriage was termed an understanding, at best, by a family friend. He may have slowed down after a fashion upon becoming president. He reportedly called a friend one day and said,
"There are 2 naked girls in the room, but I'm sitting here reading the Wall Street Journal. Does that mean I'm getting old?"
Jackie took it all with resigned hauteur. Upon finding a pair of panties in the White House bed, she turned to her husband and said, "Here, find out who these belong to. They're not my size." He carried on well-documented affairs with such notables as Jane Mansfield, Kim Novak, Angie Dickinson, and Marilyn Monroe, who, according to columnist Earl Wilson, is supposed to have said after a night with Jack, "Well, I think I made his back feel better." Monroe was later passed on to brother Bobby Kennedy. Much as Jack did, Bobby would eventually unceremoniously dump her. Peter Brown and Patty Barnes' Marilyn The Last Take, made in 1992, suggests that Monroe's death in 1962 was not a suicide, but murder. Fed up with her treatment at the hands of the Kennedys, Monroe had begun to act on threats and go public about her relationships with them. The coroner in the case has said that the nembuterol that killed her could not simply have been an overdose of pills. It was likely administered by injection in a spot unlikely to be discovered during autopsy. Brown and Barham suggest that Bobby Kennedy may have had something to do with it. Another blow to the Kennedy mystique came in early 1988 with Judith Campbell Exner, stricken with terminal cancer, decided to clear her conscience. She revealed during her 2.5-year affair with JFK, she functioned as courier between the president and the mob, delivering packages and arranging meetings between Kennedy and Chicago's mafia's godfather, Sam Giancana. Looking at the Washington Monument, can't help but muse that even George Washington himself wouldn't be above reproach today. Although he married into plenty of money when he took Martha Dandridge Curtis to wife, she owned 17,000 acres of land and a Williamsburg townhouse. The general disdained modest salaries other Revolutionary generals earned and accorded himself an expense account of $449,261.50, an emperor's ransom in those days. Over his 8 years' service, and he reportedly showed the worst possible taste in mistresses, most notably Mary Gibbons, who pumped Washington about his military plans during their trysts, and then passed on the information to William Tryon, the royal governor of New York. Tryon capitalized by raiding American seaport towns and destroying much-needed supplies. Standing out in front of the old executive office building, in November of 1986, when the Iran-Contra scandal first started to open up, it was as deeply disturbing as any revelation in Washington since the Watergate scandals. The Reagan administration, in its zeal to topple the socialist Sandinista government in Nicaragua, had illegally sold arms to Ayatollah Khomeini's Iran to fund a ragtag army of freedom fighters in Nicaragua known as the Contras. There were many parallels between the two scandals. Both revealed glimpses of a secret government accountable only to the president, and that in a very hazy way, financed with ill-gotten public funds and used to carry out policies against the express wishes of Congress. Watergate had its Plumbers and Dirty Tricks Committee. Iran-Contra had CIA Director William Casey speaking approvingly of Oliver North, of a permanent, off-the-shelf, self-sustaining, standalone entity that could perform certain activities on behalf of the United States. In the sanctimonious North, Iran-Contra had its own G. Gordon Liddy. North was the chief architect of the Iran-Contra policy, which political analyst Francis Fitzgerald called as stupid as anything since the Trojans took in that gigantic wooden horse. But during the congressional hearings into the matter in 1987, North somehow became a hero to many by the virtue of his G.I. Joe persona and such flag-waving statements as this one.
I am proud to work for that Commander-in-Chief, and if the Commander-in-Chief tells this Lieutenant Colonel to go stand in the corner and sit on his head, I will do so.
But history did not quite repeat itself. In the bowels of this enormous gray building, North and his pretty blonde secretary, Fawn Hall, showed that the misfortunes endured by Nixon and his staff had not been in vain. Determined not to leave a smoking gun on the order of Nixon's White House tapes, they shredded evidence of the affair. Through their efforts and the stubborn resistance of Reagan and his officials to congressional questions about the imbroglio, "I cannot recall" became a refrain throughout the hearings. Most of the miscreants got off with a slap on the wrist or scot-free. Hall, who concisely captured the spirit of the Iran-Contra when she told Congress, "Sometimes you have to go above the written law," later tried to cash in on her involvement with the affair, signing with the William Morris Talent Agency. In 1994, she turned up again on her way into a rehab center for treatment of cocaine addiction. Oliver North has made the most of his notoriety, publishing a book in 1991 and making a strong run for the U.S. Senate in Virginia in 1994. Ronald Reagan's Teflon reputation was finally tarnished by Iran-Contra. Either he lied in steadfastly denying involvement in the cloak and dagger theatrics of his subordinates, or he was troublingly out of touch with the policies perpetrated in his name. If it's the latter, perhaps when he said, "Every night I go to bed knowing that there are things that I am not aware of," he was justifiably paranoid. Now we're standing in front of Lee House, which was built in 1824, with the adjacent Blair House, which was built in 1958. Lee House has served as the president's official guest house since 1943, and by the way, that's where I'm staying. Blair House was once the home of Montgomery Blair, the attorney of Dred Scott, a slave who wanted to be declared a free man because he had lived for a time with his master in a free territory. His case made its way to the Supreme Court in 1857, at which point it became a focal point in the struggle over slavery and the new territories between abolitionists and pro-slavery forces. With the nation looking to the court to solve a problem Congress could not, Chief Justice Roger B. Taney, a Southerner, delivered the infamous majority opinion that a Negro had no rights that a white man was bound to respect. Therefore, Scott's case had no merit. Abolitionists were outraged, and the nation moved within a hair's breadth of civil war. In this house, Robert E. Lee was offered the command of the Union Army. Though he supported the Union, he was finally more loyal to his home state of Virginia. He turned the offer down, creating a furor in the federal capital. This small public park is Pennsylvania Avenue site flanked by statues of Rockefeller. Has been the scene of several dark incidents in Washington's past. In 1859, Daniel Sickles, a congressman from New York, discovered that his friend, Philip Barton Key, whose father was Francis Scott Key, author of the Star-Spangled Banner, had been carrying on an affair with his wife, Teresa. When Key next signaled Teresa from Lafayette Square outside the Sickles window, the infuriated Sickles rushed outside and shot Key dead. The murder sparked the sort of sensational tabloid coverage commonplace today. When the case came to trial, Sickles' lawyer successfully made use of a temporary insanity defense, and the client was acquitted. Afterward, however, Sickles was anything but repentant. "Of course I intended to kill him," he told friends. "He deserved it." In 1917, women suffragists demonstrated in Lafayette Square and were arrested, charged with obstructing traffic. Among them was Alice Paul, founder of the National Women's Party in 1913, and author of the Equal Rights Amendment in 1923. Paul and other women were jailed in the abandoned Aquarian workhouse, where they had to sleep on the floor and were given food filled with worms. When they chose to go on a hunger strike, they were force-fed with tubes stuck up their nostrils and down their throats. Women's right to vote would not be ratified until 1920. Lafayette Square continues to be a focal point for protests by citizens and groups that found the actions or inactions of the government scandalous in one way or another. Many also consider it scandalous that the park is filled with homeless people, especially since it lies directly across the street from the White House. Many who held the highest office in the land who got there precisely because they were ruthless and unprincipled. So it should come as no surprise that the White House's history is stained with scandal. John F. Kennedy was not the only president to enjoy illicit passion within these walls. Warren G. Harding, president from 1921 until his death in 1923, was reported to have enjoyed the favors of Mistress Nan Britton in a closet near the Oval Office. The family dog once sniffed them out there. Britton, 30 years Harding's junior, had a daughter she alleged was conceived with Harding on the couch of his office when he was a senator. After his death, she tried unsuccessfully to get a portion of his estate for her child, and in 1927 published a bestseller called The President's Daughter. It was dedicated to all unwed mothers and to their innocent children whose fathers usually are not known to the world. Before he was president, Harding carried on a 15-year affair with Carrie Fulton Phillips, a German sympathizer and the wife of an old friend. The Hardins and Phillipses socialized and even took trips together. When Harding ran for the presidency, the Secret Service paid off the couple and continued to supply them with hush money until Harding's death. Harding had much more serious trouble with his choice of friends than with women. During his short term, a long list of his close associates, most of them part of what was called the Ohio Gang, made fast money brokering shady deals in smoke-filled rooms. Though he publicly lauded prohibition, he was an eager participant in all-night White House poker games with his cronies, at which a full complement of illegal alcohol was available. Washington insider Alice Roosevelt Longworth, daughter of Teddy Roosevelt, considered him a slob who imbued his White House with the air of a loose speakeasy. The most infamous scandal attributed to his venal associates was Teapot Dome, in which two cabinet ministers earned enormous kickbacks from private oilmen in exchange for turning over two huge government oil reserves to them for peanuts. Not long before he died, Harding said,
"I can take care of my enemies all right, but my friends, my goddamn friends, they're the ones who keep me walking the floors at night."
It's no wonder he keeled over from a heart attack. Franklin Delano Roosevelt allegedly had lovers in the White House. Lifetime love Lucy Mercer and his secretary Missy Lehan. Lucy Mercer was with FDR when he died in Warm Springs, Georgia, but she discreetly departed before Eleanor arrived. Through the years, certain White House wives have been known for their eccentricities in personality or spending. Mary Todd Lincoln, who was often ill-tempered and mentally unstable, got so carried away with redecorating the White House that she overran by $6,700, a hefty appropriation of $20,000. When he got wind of his wife's proliferate spending, Honest Abe was incensed.
"This can never have my approval. I'll pay for it out of my own pocket first. It would stink in the nostrils of the American people to have it said the President of the United States had approved a bill overrunning an appropriation of $20,000 for flub-dubs for this damned old house when the soldiers cannot have blankets.
Jackie Kennedy, who observed upon arrival at the White House that it looked as though furnished from discount stores, fought off rumors of her husband's womanizing with lavish spending on furnishings and her own wardrobe. Nancy Reagan, on the other hand, merely borrowed the designer clothes she wore. Perhaps the most reveled of all presidential wives was Edith Bowling Wilson, a great-granddaughter of Pocahontas, who, for all intents and purposes, ran the White House for a year and a half after Woodrow Wilson suffered a severe stroke in 1919. He was left partially paralyzed and was often bedridden, but the severity of his condition was kept a secret from the American people. Edith screened all his memos and callers, essentially determining matters of state. Unlike Mary Todd Lincoln and Jackie Kennedy, Edith Wilson was a frugal First Lady. During World War I, she put sheep to graze on the White House lawn rather than pay someone to mow it. Her books, written from the viewpoint of Millie the family dog, notwithstanding, George Bush's housewifely spouse, Barbara, was popular with the public. Chief of Staff John Sununu, the fat little pirate, so called by a Bush staffer, who was Bush's right-hand man through the 1988 campaign and the early years of his presidency, was not. The bumptious, relentlessly abrasive former governor of New Hampshire ruffled feathers all over Washington when it was revealed that he had a penchant for using government jets and limos for pleasure trips. His downfall was swift and unceremonious. He resigned in December 1991. When the news was announced, a senior White House official greeted a reporter's call by singing, "Ding dong, the witch is dead." The first Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton, saw his presidential ambitions wrecked on the shoals of an affair with a married woman. Maria Reynolds' unscrupulous husband, James, didn't mind the affair at all. He began leaning on Hamilton for small sums to keep his mouth shut. Hamilton continued seeing Maria and paying off her husband for some years, until Mr. Reynolds, finding himself in hot water with the law, asked Hamilton to pull some strings for him. When Hamilton refused, Reynolds made good on his threat to go public with the sordid details of the affair. Hamilton responded by publishing his own version of the events. In a humiliating confession on the level of televangelist Jimmy Swaggart's, he described his affair with an amorous connection.
An amorous connection, detected by the husband, in passing on me the necessity of a pecuniary composition with him, and leaving me afterwards under duress of fear and disclosure. There is nothing worse in the affair than an irregular and indelicate amour. I have paid pretty severely for the folly, and can never recollect it, without disgust and self-condemnation.
As news of Hamilton's pamphlets spread, the statesman became the laughingstock of the Federalist Party. All hopes of higher office were lost to him. He was killed in a duel with Aaron Burr on July 11, 1804, not over love, but politics. The Willard Hotel has been center stage for Washington hardball politics and seamy deals for more than 100 years. In fact, it was in the lobby of the original Willard Hotel that the term lobbyist was coined. Welcome to 1455 Pennsylvania Avenue Northwest. Ulysses S. Grant, who partook of many a cigar and brandy in the Willard, was often pestered here by people seeking to influence government business. Hence, he began to refer to them as lobbyists. Apparently, his associates peddled their influence freely. By the end of Grant's administration, his vice president, Navy Department, Department of the Interior, and Diplomatic Service were all under the cloud of scandal. During and after the Civil War, government was almost completely beholden to business. Robber barons would come to places like the Willard and buy their votes from politicians for a few glasses of good whiskey, supplemented by satchels of cash. When the wheelers and dealers got rich in the process, as labor organizer Mother Jones put it, you steal a pair of shoes, you go to jail. You steal a railroad, and you go to the U.S. Senate. When muckraking journalists began to publish exposés of government corruption in the mass market magazines in the first decade of the 20th century, things began to change. But the arrogance of industrialists who were used to getting their way is clear in the response of banker J.P. Morgan had to a reform effort by President Teddy Roosevelt. "If we've done anything wrong," he said to the president, "send your man to see my man and they'll fix it up."
Standing in front of the district building, headquarters to the mayor of Washington, D.C., and on January 2nd, 1995, Mayor for Life, Marion Barry, was sworn in for a fourth term, completing the most improbable comeback of American politics.
Marion Barry was busted by FBI agents after being videotaped taking 2 long hits from a crack pipe at the Capitol's Vista Hotel on January 18, 1990. The arrest ended a year's worth of ugly rumor and speculation that Barry, who presided over the nation's capital as it was consumed by an epidemic of drug use and violence, becoming the murder capital of the country, was himself a user. Testimony presented at Barry's trial on 11 drug charges and 3 perjury counts showed the mayor to be the very picture of depravity. In columnist George Hackett's words, he was a fidgety drug addict eager to snort cocaine or smoke crack at any time, almost any place. Charles Lewis, a former city employee convicted of drug dealing in 1989, told the numerous times he and Barry had used drugs together. The favors the mayor granted to his drug pal, with Barry's help, Lewis rose from the modest city job to broker a personal management deal between the district and the Virgin Islands. And of the women Barry consorted with on his frequent drugs and sex junkets. One of these was a former model named Rashida Moore, who testified at the trial that she and Barry had used drugs together at least 100 times. It was Moore who baited the trap the FBI set for him at the Vista. A sordid, enduring image of the videotape of the arrest is the slump-shouldered, handcuffed Barry being led away, cursing Moore. Barry surrendered his job and eventually served a 6-month sentence in a federal prison in Petersburg, Virginia, where he reportedly enjoyed the attentions of a prostitute in the prison's visiting room. 30 to 50 other inmates and guests were in the room, including one Floyd Robertson who said, "It was blatant. There was no way on God's green earth anybody with common sense would not be able to know what was going on in that corner." The incident surprised no one who saw Barry appear on the Sally Jesse Raphael show to talk about his sexual addiction. Of his compulsive womanizing, Barry said, "It was all part of the addiction. This disease is cunning, baffling, powerful. It destroys your judgment." Incredibly, the people of Washington, D.C., despite his well-documented lapses in judgment, despite the fact that 14 members of his administration had been found guilty of fiscal wrongdoing, decided in November 1994 to return Marion Barry to his office in the building.
I'm on the upper terrace of Freedom Plaza. Yeah, part of the original plans for the city, drawn by the chief architect Pierre de Lancôme, black and white stone.
L'Enfant laid out the city with sweeping diagonal boulevards, open plazas, and circles, but his impetuous behavior and penchant for ignoring orders, overspending his budget, and disregarding landowners with prior claims led George Washington to relieve him of his duties after only a year. One of his co-workers, Benjamin Banneker, a freed slave who worked as a surveyor, made a copy of L'Enfant's blueprints from his memory, and the city the Frenchman envisioned was ultimately built, without just remuneration for its creator. L'Enfant became obsessed with making even more fantastic claims against the government. He asked for $95,000. The federal government offered $35,000. He lived the rest of his life on charity and off friends. He died penniless in Maryland.
In front of the old post office is a statue of Benjamin Franklin, which pays homage to this Renaissance man of America's early past.
Over the course of his life, he was many things: printer, writer, scientist, patriot, and diplomat. But with his wit, urbanity, and joy of pleasures in life, he was also a notorious rake. Although he wrote an essay called 8 Reasons Older Women Are Preferable to Younger Women later in his life, he had an illegitimate son with a younger woman and had the nerve to ask his older wife to raise the child. She did, and the biological mother moved into their home and worked as a maid. Franklin never tried to hide the affair or the child. Perhaps that's why nothing much was made of it in the pages of history. And the boy, William, grew up to become governor of New Jersey.
Now I'm out front of the FBI building. The building takes its name for its first director, J. Edgar Hoover.
Hoover built the new agency into a law enforcement empire and became enormously powerful in the process, running his fief with scant interference through the tenures of 8 presidents, 1924 to 1972. By the time he died in 1972, Hoover was feared and hated by millions for his agency's habits of bending civil liberty laws, especially when gathering information on suspected subversives, nonconformists of any stripe. After his death, rumors of misuse of FBI funds and other abuses of office began to percolate. But the death blow to Hoover's status as an American icon came with the publication of Anthony Summers' Official and Confidential in 1993. The book's revelations about Hoover's homosexuality, transvesticism, and 42-year-long relationship with Clyde Tolson, Hoover's right hand at the FBI, were notable on one hand because, as columnist Frank Rich noted,
for connoisseurs of hypocrisy, it is hard to beat the spectacle of our number one G-man, the puritanical, blackmailing spy on the sex lives of Martin Luther King and the Kennedys, the malicious prosecutor of sex deviates, getting all dolled up in cunning little cocktail ensembles.
But much more serious is Summers' finding that mobster Meyer Lansky and others in organized crime allegedly obtained pictures of Hoover and Tolson having sex and used them to blackmail Hoover into protecting them from major prosecutions.
Here we have the United States Naval Memorial depicting a lone sailor surveying the world's bodies of water. Around the outside of the monument, achievements in naval history are represented. The Navy has found the 1990s rough going. A 22-year-old radio man named Alan Schindler was harassed 24 hours a day by shipmates aboard the USS Belleau Wood after they found out that he was gay. In October 1992, he was beaten to death by fellow sailor Terry Helvey. There have been several other instances of gay bashing involving sailors in recent years. In December 1993, 3 young
and promising officers stationed in Coronado, California, became entangled in an amorous triangle that ended in a double murder and suicide. But the most far-reaching scandal to touch the Navy in many years is the deplorable behavior of naval sailors at their 1991 Tailhook Association convention in Las Vegas. In a scene that would have made Animal House parties look like polite wine and cheese affairs, a mob of drunken sailors assaulted and sexually molested 26 women, many of them naval officers, in the hallways of the Las Vegas Hilton. Many senior naval officers were at the hotel at the time, and as one outraged victim said, not one of them said stop.
I'm just a Bill. Well, we're here at the Capitol Hill. You're looking at the back side, or the west, the only part of the original facade still left of the Capitol, the cornerstone of which was laid by George Washington himself.
Capitol architect Benjamin Latrobe died prematurely in an accident here. He was killed when construction superintendent John Linthal removed a support arch that Latrobe deemed necessary, causing part of the building to collapse on top of the unfortunate Latrobe. The House of Representatives, to the right of the dome, and the Senate, to the left, have produced their share of scoundrels. The Democrats, it said, get in trouble with sex, and the Republicans with money. But there have been some crossovers. Where should we begin? Perhaps the most unsavory senator of all, and it had nothing to do with sex or money, but with fear, was Joseph P. McCarthy, a Republican from Wisconsin who reigned from 1947 to 1957, who conducted a heavy-handed witch hunt of communism and alleged communists resorting to guilt by association and scare tactics. When it comes to drinking and womanizing, the person who most readily comes to mind is Massachusetts Senator Ted Kennedy, whose life could be characterized as one long scandal, from Chappaquiddick and the tragic drowning of Mary Jo Kopechne to the Palm Beach incident in which his nephew William Kennedy Smith was accused and acquitted of raping a woman at the family vacation compound on Easter weekend in 1991. Ted Kennedy was at the estate at the time. Gary Hart, Democratic senator from Colorado, was within reach of his party's presidential nomination in 1987 when he was caught by two pesky reporters from the Miami Herald, leaving through the back door of his Capitol Hill townhouse with shapely Donna Rice, a furor ensured over the former divinity professor's ethics, when reports uncovered evidence of yet more adulterous liaisons. He was forced to abandon his presidential ambitions for the dubious consultation of becoming the butt of David Letterman's jokes.
Okay, here we go with tonight's top 10 list, ladies and gentlemen. Top 10 list of Gary Hart pickup lines. Number 10, can a Kennedy-esque guy buy you a drink? Number 9, have you ever seen a front runner naked? Number 9.
On October 7th, 1974, Wilbur Mills, Arkansas congressman and chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee, was stopped by police at Washington's cherry tree-lined tidal basin at 2 a.m. for speeding and driving without headlights on. His date for the evening, professional stripper Fanny Fox, also known as the Argentine Firecracker, panicked and plunged into the basin, taking Mills' career straight into the drink with her. South Carolina Congressman John Jenrette was already under investigation for selling underwater land in Florida when his name became linked to Abscam. He and a few of his associates were caught selling congressional favors to men they thought were Arab sheiks, but were really FBI agents. In the tape that was made of the deal, in action, Jenrette admitted, "I've got larceny in my heart." The equally pleasant crook and Congressman Michael Myers simply said, "Bullshit walks, money talks." To top off the whole mess, Jenrette and his wife Rita were spotted having sex one night on the steps of the Capitol's west side. Jenrette was later arrested for shoplifting shoes and ties, and the now ex-Mrs. Jenrette wrote a tell-all tome called My Capitol Secrets. Then she went on to expose herself more fully to the public in Playboy. Barney Frank, Democratic congressman from Massachusetts, made the headlines in 1990 when it was disclosed that his boyfriend was running a male prostitution ring out of Frank's Capitol Hill townhouse. And in the fall of 1991, taxpayers were horrified to learn that 252 members of the House of Representatives and 51 former members had overdrafts, many into the thousands of dollars, with the House Bank.
In 1963 and 64, the Warren Commission, led by Chief Justice Earl Warren, who served from 53 to 69, investigated the assassination of John F. Kennedy and determined that gunman Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone, a conclusion that few believe today.
This could be the major cover-up of the century. On October 15, 1991, Clarence Thomas, who had been chairman of the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission under President Ronald Reagan, became the 106th Supreme Court Justice, but not without great controversy. At his confirmation hearing, a former aide, Anita Hill, leveled charges of sexual harassment against Thomas, who labeled it high-tech lynching. Thomas and Hill came to the hearings with sparkling reputations for character and integrity. Hill calmly delivered her specific, graphic testimony, and Thomas responded with agonized denials. In the end, the only clarities revealed were that either Hill or Thomas was a monumental liar, and that these two people had been swept up by the relentless undertows of partisan politics and the media's scandal machine. Thomas was confirmed by the Senate by a 2-margin vote. Some say Hill's action made it easier for other women to come forward in sexual abuse situations. Case in point, November 1992, 10 women pressed charges of sexual harassment against Oregon Senator Bob Packwood, who managed to keep the allegations quiet until after his re-election.
Stay tuned for more upcoming scandals. I'm sure we won't have to wait another 200 years for my next report.
Good evening. I hope the program you viewed sparked some interest in the complicities of the lives of our politicians. These complicities have also resulted at times in their own destruction. The research was conducted and correlated from our local libraries. If you wish to read more about it, you might wish to check out these publications. The President's Daughter by Nan Britton. Official and Confidential by Anthony Sumner. By Capital Secrets by Rita Jenrette. Maryland, The Last Tale by Peter Brown and Patty Barhans. William Allen Wright and March on Main Street by John DeWitt McKee. George F. Will by Larry W. Chappell. The Congressman Who Got Away with Murder by Nat Grant. The Story of Alice Paul and the National Woman's Party by Inez Haynes. The Homeless by Elaine Landau. Princess Alice, a biography of Alice Roosevelt Longsworth by James Braw. Earl Warren, a political biography by Leo Ketchum. Clarence Thomas, Supreme Court Justice by Norman L. Mott. Washington Scandals by Rena Bulkin. The White House Transcripts by R. W. Apple, Jr. The Presidents of the United States of America by Frank Friedel. The First Ladies by Margaret Brown Clapton. We the People, The Story of the United States Capitol by the United States Capitol Historical Society. And thank you.